Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gilbert Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And welcome to the second week of the new authors and guests for the month of April. Now, my guest today is first and foremost a storyteller and an artist. Words are his palette. Fantasy and science fiction are his genres of choice, and he loves to explore the darker side of human nature through the filter of heroes, villains, and everything in between. He is also a freelance writer, a book lover, and a guy who just loves to meet new people and spend hours talking about his fascination for the worlds he encounters in the pages of fantasy and science fiction novels. Speculative fiction provides us an escape, a way to forget about our mundane problems and step into worlds where anything is possible. It transcends age, gender, religion, or lifestyle. It is our way of believing what cannot be, delving into the unknowable, and discovering hidden truths about ourselves and our world in a brand new way. Fiction at its best. And to tell us more about that and more about his series, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, author Andy Peloquin. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I was going to do my dad's joke of like going all the way around and doing the round of applause, but I didn't want to start off the interview on that footing. So we'll just, hello, I'm a very wise and serious person.
Awesome, awesome. And listeners, if you may also remember, I featured Andy's book on the podcast a few weeks earlier in my Wandering Quill impressions. And if you're fans of The Witcher, the game, and the original books, you're going to love this. So, Andy, do you have a copy of it you would like to share for the listeners and the viewers?
Look at that. Look at that thing. Look at the size of this.
Yes.
This is not for the faint of heart, literally and figuratively.
Yes, it is a wonderful piece of fiction, very, very much like The Witcher, which I absolutely love. And I'm just very, very curious, Andy, when did you decide to become a writer and author? Like, tell us about that journey and a little bit more about your background growing up and what drew you to writing.
Yeah, sure. So I was born and raised abroad. I was born in Japan. I lived there until I was a teenager. So I did homeschooling,
Oh,
and
okay.
I had some teachers who came in like tutors and stuff, and one of them was just super passionate about science and math. Sorry, science and art, which are two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right.
But he made it so exciting that we were all kind of getting into it, and I found as we were doing it, I am a terrible artist. Like, I mean, I can do an amazing stick figure, but other than that, I can't do anything. So it was either that or writing, and so writing was kind of where I gravitated to naturally, and I discovered that I really really enjoyed it. So that's kind of where I got my start at a young age. I didn't really start writing sort of officially until I was in my mid-20s.
All right.
I have, no background in it, no education beyond high school. So it was just kind of like, this seems like fun. Let's do this and see where it goes. And I'm a little bit of obsessive about like my passions. So once I discovered that I really liked writing, it was like, all right, we are now going to full on obsess and learn everything there that I can learn about this. And that's kind of how my writing career got started.
Nice. And for those that haven't watched my impressions video of Andy's book, Andy, what can you tell us about Dark Blade Assassin and that series?
Absolutely. So I like to call Darkblade John Wick in a fantasy world. Um,
Very fitting.
it was inspired by the sort of ferocity of Wolverine, the vengeance-driven story of the Punisher, and the heroism of Dritz It's kind of like taking all these things and putting together a very, very interesting, complex character. He's a killer, right? He's an
Yes.
assassin for hire. He does it. There's no question whether he's going to drop the bodies or not. It's just how many it's going to take. before he gets out of there. Whoever gets in his way, they're going down. So it's very much not a heroic character, but there's just enough about him, kind of like Wolverine. You always want Wolverine's claws to come out and to take down the bad guy. And he feels kind of heroic, anti-heroic, but still heroic enough because of the choices that he makes. Even if it's a small choice, it's like, I could choose the selfish thing, or I could allow myself to be hurt. And he allows himself to be hurt because it's better than someone else getting hurt. Like, it's those small little choices that make a character anti-heroic versus the villain in a very dark fantasy world.
I definitely agree. And I like the fact you brought up John Wick, because I remember hearing what the director said, and I actually resonated when I was reading your book, where John Wick is not a good guy. He's an assassin. The reason why people like John Wick as a character is he has a code. And the main character in your story, he lives by a code. And that is what, in that sense, makes him the protagonist, the hero of the story. And when crafting this very, very complex but heavily fantasy-driven and just narrative-enriched world, what is sort of the desire or need you want to satisfy for your readers?
For me, it was always about the exploration of this complex character, but eventually it actually became sort of a look into my own psychology. In 2013, I was diagnosed with Asperger on the autism spectrum. And when I got that, I was like, okay, this changes everything. I've known I'm different all my life, but why? What's going on here? So I kind of went, again, obsessive, deep dive into the psychology, into my own psyche, but then it led to all kinds of other things as well. So I was like, this character is an outsider like me. He is looking for a place in a world where he doesn't belong. Let's go with that. Let's explore that theme. And so that's what it becomes. All the external threats and struggles are basically just a mirror to his own inner struggle. Like, he's literally got voices in his head that drive him to kill. And so it's like he's fighting against his own worst nature. Very, very Dexter in that sense. But
yes,
at the time, for me, I was struggling with being a step parent to, growing children. There was so much. My instinct was to go one way, and yet I felt like I should go another way. Like, the right thing to do was a different way. So I had to fight my own instincts. And there was this real struggle within myself. So I was like, well, let's put that on the page and tell this story. Obviously, it's an assassin, right? It's a totally different, exciting story. But underneath it, every quiet moment that he has, they're basically struggles that he has. In one scene, he's at a fancy party and he's looking around and he's seeing all these people and he's like, I don't belong here. And I felt that everywhere I went when I was living in Mexico at the time. I'm 6.5 feet tall and very, very white. Living in Mexico, I towered a good foot over everybody and I always stood out. So I was always like stuck in a corner to stay out of people's way, quiet, withdrawn, so I didn't draw unnecessary attention to myself. This is the hunter's story in a different sense, but it's very much my own story. So being able to tell it gave me an opportunity to process my own struggles, in a way that was like, there was a disconnect. It wasn't like, okay, go sort your shit out with these psychological steps. It was like, well, your assassin character did this. Give it a try. See if that works for you. And so it's like everything that I've written has basically been me processing or dealing with my own struggles, or struggles that I can wrap my head around or compare to my own life.
Fascinating. And now that you told me about that, it makes sense in my initial reading of Dark Blade Assassin, especially that one sword that the main character has, that sort of like that throbbing blade that's telling him, saying, I want to be released. I want to be unsheathed. Now that actually makes sense. And that's a very clever thing, which it takes the fantasy genre, the dark fantasy genre, and really adds a new spin to it. And I really, really appreciate that. And it also reminded me also of the Muramasa blades from Japanese mythology, the blades that have to be unsheathed or else they'll kill its owner. And so when crafting that very, very complex story and the different overlapping narratives within this story, as well as the other books in the series, what is sort of the overall promise you're making to your readers?
I mean, the promise is that you're going to understand this character and all the people that he interacts with. Everything that I do, I kind of tend to imitate R.A. Salvatore's style of writing, in the sense that he walks you through Dritz Jordan's mental processes, how he solves through a problem, right? Or he deals with some emotional struggle. I found that I needed to do that to understand the incomprehensible, right? So right now, for example, the hunter, this is book 9 that I'm working on, he's on a ship with a bunch of former soldiers. He's never been a soldier. So how does he understand a soldier? Well, he's researched soldiers to pretend to be them for his assassinations, but he's also dealt with, killing people for a living and kind of understanding that. So when someone does something, he's like, well, I'm gonna connect it to something that I can understand, even if it's not exactly the same, and then it makes it comprehensible for him and me, and then the reader. So it's kind of like, that's my approach to things. It's like, all right, let's pose a question, right? When is it okay to kill? Well, let's answer that question. When is it wrong to kill? So Darkblade, the good guys are one of the biggest enemies. It's the beggar priests who are, they're feeding the sick and taking care of the sick, feeding the homeless. They're good. It's a good religion, but they're his enemies because of certain, elements to the story. So it's like, anytime he has to decide whether or not to kill them or to go against them, it feels wrong. And yet, because you've seen him walk through these processes, these mental processes, you can understand his choices. And by understanding the choices, you can empathize with him more effectively. And I think for me, that's what has sort of unconsciously gotten into my writing, is that I need to empathize and understand people. I need to empathize with and understand people. So through my journey of discovering what there is that I can empathize with, both the fellow allies and the antagonists, you're going to do the same thing. And together, we're all going to become a little bit more empathetic and understanding.
Wow. Although you're talking about it, just reminded me, I just played The Witcher like last night, so I saw the Church of the Eternal Fire in my head. Well,
nice.
This sounds like a nicer version of this, at least from what you've told me initially. I haven't fully finished the first book yet. That could automatically change. But yeah, for those who've played the Witcher 3 game, Church of the Eternal Fire, they're not really good people. They burn mages at the stake, and very, very violent. But yeah, that does bring up a good question. Like, in the story, like for these characters, like, when is it a good time to take a life? Because in stories, we always say, like, oh yeah, the hero did this because it was the right thing to do. But that's a matter of perspective depending on who looks at it. And so going back again to like, this is a very complex fantasy story, but it really makes you think about it, and it really makes you ask all these questions. So when you finished the first draft of this and then got it published, what was the initial feedback like from your readers and ARC teams or even beta teams?
So when I first finished the draft and I sent it to readers, they were like, this is a great adventure, but we need so much more. And again, this was the very, very first rough draft. And this is when I was like, okay, tell me what's not good enough. And they're like, well, there's nothing to connect us to this character. He's super badass, great action scenes, but there's no engagement with him. So this is where I kind of went on the deep dive into the psychology to understand the assassin. And that's kind of when I came to understand what connected me to this character were these emotional elements. And that's what's driven every story since, is like, I need to be able to engage with them on an emotional and psychological level. And if I can do that, I need to make sure that the reader can do that. And then you don't lose them. Sure, I could lose them with some, plot that people are like, oh, wow, he went to this magical city where people, eat other people. I'm out. Or they're like, okay, he did this plot thing that I didn't like, but because I'm invested in this character's journey, they follow along. They put up with sort of, the occasional mistake plot-wise. And that's for me as a reader, their books can make mistakes, right? It happens all the time. But a good book will make a mistake maybe plot-wise, but they won't make a mistake character-wise. The characters will stay consistent. They will be engaging, even if the story I don't care if, they go off on the side quest to some city of the damned and, I don't care. But you give me a character with all the, the emotional twists and turns. I don't care where they go. They could be peeling potatoes in a kitchen and the story is engaging because they are engaging.
Wow. I actually like you brought that up because it does really make sense. Like the story itself could be not as memorable, like the plot wise of the overall story, but if the character is what truly captivates the reader, then that's perfect. That's almost like a good movie. A movie's plot could be bonkers. It could just be cheesy. It could be campy, and that'll be fine. If the characters make it and they sell it and they really give their heart, that is what people are going to remember. Not the overall movie, it's the characters in the movie, which you're absolutely right. So, kind of following up with that, Andy, you would say you're working on the 9th book now. Would you say that your promise, your initial promise that you made in the beginning, has been validated 9 books in with this character in this series?
I mean, I will say that people have connected with this character. So right now, I've been a full-time author since 2018, and the bulk of my sales, my income, whatever, has come off the back of this series. So it is still the one that people know me best by. It's the one that people connect with the most. It is the one with the broadest appeal. So I will say that I believe so. The only thing that I can do is just draw people deeper and deeper into my emotional web, we'll call it. So with the original incarnation, Hero of Darkness, which is what it was published at in 2018, there were six books, and that was sort of the first story arc. It was originally going to be just self-contained 6 books, but I got to the end of the 6th book, and I was like, wait, I just set up all this stuff. This is so much more emotional turmoil that I can put this poor sucker through. Why would I stop here when I could just keep tormenting him, and not on a physical level, because it's very much like he gets knocked down repeatedly, but he always gets back up. So in that sense, the Wolverine effect is very true. But it's the emotional turmoil that is so much fun, that engages me so much. It's like he's found out all these things, and he's like, he has to process these complex things that, I as a human being have no way to process them. So it's, right now, Darkblade 4 is the rewritten version of that original 6-book story arc. So starting in book 5, it is book 5 until 15. This is how long the series is going to be, because the elements that were opened up by the ending of what is now book 4, it is just so much emotional turmoil in the best way possible. So I'm like, there is a journey that I started on when I was the parent to young children, right? The hunter finds a young girl to protect, and then he finds a young boy to sort of champion, right? Mm-hmm. This is the story of Andy as the parent to young children, step parent to young children. The hunter is as terrible a parent, or perhaps slightly worse a parent, than I was. So his whole journey is very much a reflection of that. Now, Andy is the father of 20-year-old children or young adults. There is a whole new realm of drama to be mined from this new phase of my life. And this is what Darkblade 5 to 15 is all about, is just digging deeper and going into a stage, I think a stage in a parent's life that very few books really touch on, is when your kids are old enough to leave home. It's always about the parent's adventure or the kid's adventure, but it's never kind of that dynamic, especially if it's a fraught dynamic. So it's this is what is connecting me to the story so much. It's the emotional stakes, and I think people reading that so far, we're 8 books in, and the newest book just released a couple of months ago. It's got 4.8 stars. So people are connecting with it. That's all I can say.
Congratulations on that.
I will never claim to be the best author, right? That is, you can see these men behind me on my shelf, Brandon Sanderson, these are the ones who take the title of best. But with an Andy Peloquin book, you will have a character and emotional stakes that you can get invested in. That is my goal. And of course, badass action scenes. Like, I will throw my battles and my fight scenes up against any author. I may not be better, but they will hold their own.
Awesome, awesome. So now this kind of leads into another more personal question, which I always like to ask my authors, which is, I'm sure as you know, Andy, writing a book, and in case like a series, is a very lonely journey in the sense that you're giving hours and hours into a project. You're writing it, you are deconstructing it, you're editing it time and time again. And most times, I've spoken with many authors on this question, sometimes the book may not even sell. Sometimes it may sell a few copies, and sometimes it may not and fade away. And that can deflate an author. So, for you, Andy, what would you say disciplines you to continue writing? What disciplines you to keep going forward as an author?
So the secret that I will tell you that has enabled me to write 6 series, 5 complete, 1 still in progress, is that I write the series before publishing the first book. Or I write enough of the series that I have to finish it. So an example of this would be the Silent Champions series. One second.
All right.
Silent Champions.
Oh, I like that cover. I like it a lot.
This is basically Rainbow Six style tactics, but in a fantasy world with fantasy soldiers.
Oh,
It was so much fun to write and so much work because it's, we're dealing with battles like one battle takes place in a city and you've got 100,000 civilians and 30,000 soldiers. Like, how do you even write this kind of thing? So it was definitely an epic endeavor. But my secret with this one is that I just wrote the first 3 books without releasing them. I had other stuff coming out because I'm a fast writer. So I had the Heirs of Destiny series coming out.
oh, okay.
But I was already at work on the next books in the next series. So by the time I released this one, Shields and Shadow, I was already almost done with book 3, or I was done with book 3. And the story, the main story arc ends with book 4. So I'm like, look, I gave all of this to this story. It's one more book. If it doesn't sell like gangbusters, well, it's just one more book. It's another 3 months of my life. And this is kind of my approach to it, is like, Darkblade is the exception because when I relaunched Darkblade, it had earned itself out in the sense of it had proven that it had, sellability. All these other series have been launched with no notion of whether they're going to work or not. They have all worked to varying degrees, but Darkblade is the one that's like, I know for a fact that people keep engaging with it and keep it, connecting with it, so it continues to sell even almost 3 years later. So that's the one that I'll keep going with. But the other ones, it's like, I'm going to get invested in this story and invested enough that I'm just going to keep writing it until I'm done. And then I'll move on to something else. And if I wait until the book or, the series is partly written, mostly written before I start releasing it, well, there's no backing out now. I have to finish for my own sake. I'm a completionist at heart. So I have to finish the story. If it doesn't make a ton of money, well, it's a good, every series that I've done has been an experiment. With Darkblade, I went straight epic dark fantasy. Child of the Night Guild, I was like, you know what? Grimdark is hot. Let's dive into that. Heirs of Destiny, young adult action adventure to appeal to the other kind of audience.
Right.
Silent Champions, military. Everything is kind of a slightly different offering. So that I'm like, hey, you love, John Gwyn's Malice, Silent Champions. You love Lies of Locke Lamora, Child of the Night Guild. You love Six of Crows, Heirs of Destiny. There's something for every reader. That was my approach to writing these stories.
Fascinating. And kind of speaking of the author that you mentioned before, I always think it's important to always ask this question is, as authors, we're always motivated and inspired by the authors that we enjoy reading, of the genres we're writing of. So, Andy, what authors would you say have really helped you craft your authorial voice, as well as world building, character arcs and construction, and overall narrative style?
Okay, so Night Angel by Brent Weeks. I got to the end of it. There was no more Durzo Blint. So I was like, fuck it. I'm writing my own. That's the long and the short inspiration behind Darkblade. I wanted more of this character and I ended up writing my own.
Alrighty.
Lies of Locke Lamora, the world blew me away. Like the characters were spectacular, but I was like, look, there's no way that as a newbie author, I can write characters anywhere near this good. But what I can do is I can shoot for a really interesting world, and I can sort of take the flavors that I loved of this world and draw on it. Brandon Sanderson's Way of Kings, right here. Epic in scope. I did not have the ambition to tackle anything so epic, but I loved his workmanlike approach to storytelling. So I took that. I took the bits and pieces of his approach to crafting his world and, setting the scene and all of that. Characters, Icewind Dale. Drizzt Do'Urden is a direct inspiration behind The Hunter because I loved the brutality of Artemis and Trary and the morality of Drizzt Do'Urden and their endless clashing. So I was like, well, we're just going to take these two people and we're going to put them in one guy's head. And that's the character, basically. Like, this is, again, a very reductionist explanation. There's a great deal more that goes into it. But to put it simply, it is this endless struggle that Artemis and Trary and Drizzt Do'Urden have just boiled down into one person's mind. And then last but not least is Michael J. Sullivan's Rhaenyra series. The character dynamic between the two characters, Royce and Hadrian, was so wonderful. The story didn't necessarily even have to be epic. It definitely was. But what made it so engaging was the connection between these two characters. So for me, I was like, this is what I want. I want people to love my characters as much as I love these characters. I could not tell you the plot of Rhaenyra except for the grand spectacular ending. I do not remember, but I will tell you, Royce and Hadrian are the most memorable characters, or some of the most memorable characters, because they're stuck in my head. So this is what I want. I want people to think badass assassin, the hunter. I don't want them to think Night Angel. I don't want them to think, Rez King Dark Tiding. I want them to think badass assassin, the hunter, because they connected with him on an emotional level.
Amazing. And I love asking this question because I learned a lot about new authors to explore, even though you can't really see I'm surrounded by my own library and I don't need any more books. But it's just so fascinating because I love to read, and reading is an important research tool because it allows us authors to really see, is this the genre that we actually want to try to dabble our hand in, be it fantasy, thriller, sci-fi, history. It's a lot of research and it's a lot of time and investment, but sometimes it is beneficial. And now that kind of leads into more of the business side of being an author, which I think is important to discuss. So, Andy, when you finished writing the first book in your Dark Blade series, you finally got the cover, you finally had it proofread, edited, it was perfect. When you decided you wanted to get it published, did you want to go the traditional publishing route, or did you want to go the indie route from the beginning?
So back in 2014, when I finished writing the first draft of the book, it was called Blade of the Destroyer at that time, right? This is forever and an age ago. I did shop it around to publishers and I got some interest, but no one engaged with it. Same for Child of the Night Guild. People were like, I like this, but it's not what we're looking for. And that's totally fair. I've come to understand that the traditional market is very, very specific, and my style of writing does not necessarily fill that gap. Within 6 months, I had already written the next book and had started on book 3. And I'm like, if it takes them 6 months just to get back to me with a no, which is totally fair, what happens when I sit on it for another 6 months and I've got book 4 written and I'm into book 5? And then it's going to take them a year to publish book 1. And that time I'm going to have another 5 books written. Like, I write fast. So at a certain point, it stops being the smart play to go traditional because they're publishing speed. Now, the day will come when I write a story that I think will fit with what trad publishing is looking for, that I will consider sitting on it and shopping it around. For now, my current workload in terms of the stories that I'm telling, Darkblade, Dragonblood Assassin last year, the new secret project that I'm working on now, those things cater towards indie publishing because I can write them in 6 months and have a trilogy ready to go. So that makes it a lot easier for me to just be like, well, let's do this. And I can get back to work on the next thing or, plot out some new project.
100% agree. And also thing too, as I've always said, being indie author, you do have more creative control over your story because, as I've always talked about, going traditional route is good if that's the way you want to go, but you just have to realize that is a company that's taking an investment on you. If you do not make them money to recuperate all the finance, all the marketing they put into this book, they will drop you. And
Yep.
that is the hard truth, but it's a necessary thing to understand about this industry. Indie author, you have to market yourself. You have to find your own cover artists. You have to find your own editors. It does take money out of your own pocket. But if this is something that you want to do, then it is worth it. Which kind of leads into the next question, Andy. When you decide to make your other books for your other series, how important was it for you to truly do research on, finding the audience, understanding the right readership that's really going to get the attention for these books? Because I definitely think that's kind of the one aspect that young indie authors overlooked is the readership and knowing your audience.
Yeah, so I think that I've said it a couple of times on interviews and podcasts is that where traditional publishing excels is giving us these like tentpole books that are like spectacular and unique. As an example is Empire of the Damned, Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff, right? There is nothing else like this out there. Castlevania is sort of a close thing, but there is nothing that's just this bloody, brutal vampire thing. Now, everybody loves Empire of the Vampire. So there's going to be no more vampire-themed books in the same flavor being published by trad publishers. Right. Now, if an indie author sees that and is like, well, let's do something similar, we're going to fill in the little gaps between those tentpoles. So we'll be like, ooh, there's this niche that people loved. Nothing else is coming out there. I'm going to give people what they love. And that is where we excel. And so I think that is the most important thing is if you see sort of a niche that people are loving, or there's a series that people are loving, and you can fill that niche with the story that you're telling, that's when you have the greatest chance of success. Now, these niches can be massive in the sense of there are a million dragon stories, a million young adult action adventure stories, a million grimdark stories. Like, at the end of the day, you can be as unique as you want. But if you give people more of what they want, they're more likely to dive in, as opposed to trying to be too unique and too original. I will never tell someone to not exercise their imagination and go for broke with some really cool story concept. But you run the risk that you are too unique, or it's too hard to sell. I mean, I've heard people who try, to create a whole new subgenre of things, and it just doesn't work. So it's all about finding where the market is at, where readership's interest is, and creating something that both taps into sort of what's popular now, but while also being evergreen. I know for a fact that because Night Angel was published in the early 2010s and Waylander was published in the 1970s, 1980s, there will always be a market for badass, grumpy, kind of broody assassins. Right. Now, Aragon was popular, and then other stuff became popular, and maybe it's coming back around now with Murtaugh, but then it's not going to be popular anymore, and then now it's something else. And so it's like there are certain things that play more to trends, and there are things that are sort of evergreen. So finding the most evergreen story possible, that is my recommendation to people.
Definitely. And I'm going to go back to something I said a long time ago in this interview, which is when writers think of, like, as you mentioned, try to make something too unique or too new, they run that risk of like losing the audience. But I think that I remember one author said this to me, is that writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves. We make stuff up, we cheat people out of their time, and we're stealing from other inspirations, because the same story has been said over and over again. The hero's journey, the archetypes, or the subplots, or everything has been told over and over again with just a new lens. And that's okay. That is absolutely fine, as long as you make it your own, where it's still familiar, but still original. I think, as you said, that's the nice sweet spot. You don't want to make it too unique where it kind of loses the reader, but you don't want to have it be a spoof or parody of a famous book or for another famous series.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about finding your own story. You could give 5 different authors the exact same characters, and within 1,000 words, they would be 5 different stories, right? Everyone would have their own personality. Everyone would have their own flavor of world building. Everything would be different because we are the sum of our experiences and the things we're exposed to. So I may have fallen in love with Night Angel because it hit me at just the right time, and someone else read it and they're like, eh. So all of a sudden, give us Assassins, and my assassin's going to be Night Angel. Someone else who fell in love with Sarah J. Maas will write an assassin like Throne of Glass. But what makes it so cool is that we are all telling our own stories or our own unique stories. So when you are an author telling a story, give me, the reader, something to sink my teeth into, some connection to you, the author, through your story. Because
Right.
that is what makes a story truly engaging, is when you can bring that little bit of yourself and you can be genuine on the page, even though there is this mask of fiction over it. At the core of it, it's all about humanity. It's all about the human experience and the emotion that drives us all.
Definitely. And that kind of leads into sort of like the last 3 questions of the interview before we get to the final question. So this question I've added to the list because I always feel it's a new question to really explore for all authors, which is let me first give a little context for this question. So I had a guest on the show who brought up a really important thing, which is for every new indie author, the biggest lie you could believe in this industry is that your debut novel is what's going to be your legacy, your name builder. And that is not true. It may
It's
not
not
be your
always
first
true.
book. Not always true. I say not always true. Thank you for that. It may be your next book. It may be your 5th book. It may even be your 10th or 20th book where that really uh, gets your name out there and people see who you are. And that you can say, if you enjoyed this book, I got so many more to see my progression. And for you, Andy, in your own opinion, how important is it for young indie authors to really know that 9 times out of 10 or maybe even 50%, your book may not be, your debut book specifically may not be the one book that really gets your name out there on the digital stage?
I think it's not necessarily about the book itself, but it's about the size of your audience. So I will say that I am sort of the exception to that rule, because Darkblade, the one that I'm best known for, is my first novel.
Right.
It is the first novel that I published, and it is the one that I republished in 2018 and then republished again in 2021. Now it's been reworked because when I rewrote Darkblade, I was a much more experienced author, but it is still the same story at its core that it was when I wrote it in 2015. So I figured out a way to make it work. I had a product that was viable from the beginning, and it proved that it would sell. So I rewrote it to be better and to be something that I can be proud of and say, this is my flagship product. It's not riddled with newbie mistakes like Hero of Darkness
Right.
was, but it is something that I can confidently say, this is the series that I'm best known for. It may still have mistakes because I am an imperfect author, but it is something that people connect with the most. Now, there are a lot of authors who put out a spectacular first book. They just don't have a big audience. Then their next book comes out and their audience is a little bit bigger, and it may not do as well because second books are hard. And then the
Right.
third book comes out, and then the third book doesn't do well because by the time book 3 comes out, the audience that you had with book 1, it kind of got a little bigger or smaller, whatever it is. But then you put out a new series, and all of a sudden you get a bigger audience that way. It's all about your audience growing. So if you write a great first book, it may be the stepping stone that leads you to the super successful third series launch.
Right.
Or it may be you start off with this first book and it's spectacular and it's the one that you're always best known for. It's just not the best book that you've ever written. Another one sells better. It's all about your platform. So when it comes down to the business side of things, make each plan each book and series like it's going to be the one that you will be best known for. Your first one, your second one, your third one, your 15th one. make it the best that you can, because you never know what's going to hit until after it is already hit. Or a series that isn't super popular today may go on to pick up an audience way later on down the line. And that's all about, like, the audience may not be there today, but when, if it's got a solid foundation of quality, then it's something that you can build your reputation as an author on. My Child of the Night Guild series sold very, very poorly because I made some mistakes on the launch. But people read it and they fall in love with it. And it's still one that they're like, I don't know, I love Darkblade, but I love Child of the Night Guild, and I don't know which one is better. When they read it, it will never be the one that I'm best known for, or it may never be the one that I'm best known for, but it's one that I can hold up and say, this is a damn good book, just like this one. And I can be proud of both of them together. So you never know what's going to resonate with audiences.
100%. And that is very, very true. You never know. Sometimes one audience may like one book you have or one series. A new audience may have an interest in another book, or sometimes it'll cross over. You never truly know. And that's the beautiful thing about being an author. It's the uncertainty in that sense. It's the mystery. And then this kind of leads into the next two final questions before the last one, Andy. So looking back now with everything that you've learned as a professional author with these numerous series that have garnered a large fan base, who have been your biggest supporters in your journey? And the second part to this question is, have you ever gotten a sense of validation from fellow indie authors who have come across your book and have promoted on their site and have messaged you and say, this is amazing, this is where you belong? And I ask that question because it's one thing to write a book in a genre and put it out there to try to get a new audience. It's another thing entirely to have a peer, a respected member in that genre, in the author community, to see that and to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, so the people who have been most supportive for me, I got fortunate enough early on in my career to find some very good quality ARC and beta readers, and they were the foundation of like my Facebook group, my email newsletter. So I will always thank those people for basically keeping me alive in terms of my author career, because when I write a book or when I do, the first ones to go and pick it up. They're the first ones to read about it. They're the first ones to rave about it. It's spectacular. I have been fortunate enough to connect with fellow indie authors who have resonated with my books. There have been a few that were just like, I loved their books, so hearing they loved my books is the best compliment ever.
Awesome. Awesome. And is there any personal shout out you want to give to any specific authors that you've encountered who have read Darkblade or other books in your series you want to mention?
I mean, so the probably the one who is most supportive, he's not an author anymore. Life has led him in different directions, is Stevie Collier. We ran the Fantasy Fiends podcast for 4 years together. And he was basically my sounding board and my, we were trying to break into the industry together and figure things out. So it was just like, it was so nice to have someone that I could work with together on doing these things. I helped him with his stuff. He helped me with my stuff. And we kind of just figured the industry out together. I would not be where I am if it wasn't for him.
Awesome. Awesome. And now we come to the final question, Andy, probably the most important one. So, in all your years of experience, from what you've learned in the beginning as a new author to now a man who has published numerous books for numerous series, has garnered a wide range of people, what is your word of wisdom to fellow indie authors out there who really want to get into this business, this industry?
That's a good question. So I'm going to give you two answers to that question. The first one is going to be on the craft side. And that is, make your characters as engaging as possible. Plot is important, but it is not the most important thing. The most important thing is making characters that people can sink their teeth into and really connect with. Because if you can connect them with your character, they're willing to put up with, saggy middles or plot twists that don't quite hit or things like that. Character work is way more important than plot. So nail that character work, focus on it. On the business side of things, learn before you do. I've been telling people the day that you have your book one ready to go, set launch date 1 year later. So if today an author is finishing their book, it is April 9th, set it for April 9th, 2025, and use that year to, number one, save up for a great cover, learn how to do advertising and marketing and save up to run some ads, start building your newsletter, get on social media and start being part of the community. And by that, I don't mean talk about your book incessantly. I mean, figure out where you fit in this community. In the last 6 months, I found that I love raving about books. So that's what I do on social media. I rave about books. I talk about my books occasionally, but I'm all about, hey, I love this book. You will too. And I like other people dread being on social media. It inspires me because I am able to share my love of stories with others. This is my approach to social media. It's not going to work for everybody. It happens to work for me. So use that year to do everything, to gain all the knowledge that you need to know about the business side of publishing and work on the next book or 2 or 3 or however many you can write in that time. Then when you launch that book, you've got the solid foundation built, you have the solid understanding, you have the money you need to invest in the expenses that need to be invested in. And you are not guaranteed success, but by doing this, you are guaranteeing yourself the best chances of success.
Probably the best advice I've ever had on this show, Andy, and very, very true. And with that, listeners, we conclude this amazing interview with our guest today, Andy Peloquin. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to offer the floor to you if you want to promote any future works that are coming out that we should be on the look for, as well as where can people find and engage with you on social media?
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about all of my books. I've got 6 series, 45 books and counting. So go to my social media, Andy Peloquin author on Instagram and TikTok. My website, andypeloquin.com. Amazon page is Andy Peloquin. Take a look at my books. See if there's one that appeals to you. If there's a character that you feel like, I could probably resonate with that emotional journey, and give it a try. I don't have anything special. I mean, I'm working on book 9 right now. There will be 15 Darkblade books when all is said and done. I'm always working on something new. Right now, I can't talk about anything because it's very, very secret and hush-hush. But there will be more news coming in the near future. But yeah, give me a follow on social media, and you will find a fellow diehard reader who rarely talks about his books and will always add to your TBR pile.
And I will link all those down below in the description of this video, as well as link the video of me giving my book impression of Andy's Darkblade Assassin. And let's see what you all think. And with that, listeners, this concludes this amazing author interview. Again, I want to thank our guest, Andy, for joining us today and providing his insight, his wisdom, and everything he's learned about the business as an author and what we can expect from him in the near future. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
And until next time, listeners, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. And until next time, like and subscribe and comment down below.